Hi, I'm Lauren Helfer. Today, we're going to begin Lesson 3 of a three-part series to get you ready to use digital interactive notebooks with your students, in person or in a virtual setting. This lesson is about how to actually teach using digital notebooks because it's a little bit different than when you teach using a paper-based notebook. Let's begin. So now we're going to talk about what are we actually going to do when we're teaching, when we're using a digital interactive notebook. So this isn't really so much as a demonstration as just a little chat about some techniques that will work well when you're using digital notebooks because it's different than when you're using a paper-based notebook. So the first thing to think about is when you're deciding how you're going to teach with it is what is the setting? Are your students with you in person? Are your students virtually learning? Are they distance learning? Or do you have some of both, where you have a group of students that's in person with you, as well as students that are simultaneously distance learning with your in-person students at the same time? So let's talk first about in person. So ideally what you would like to do is display your interactive notebook using your projector. Most teachers have a projector that is hooked up to their computer. So what I would recommend is making some copies of the notebook for yourself. If you have multiple class periods, I would suggest making yourself a copy for each class period that you have. That way you have a fresh notebook to start with each new group of students. So they're not already seeing things that you've typed in a previous class that you may not be ready for them to look at. The next thing I'd recommend is if you have a whiteboard, project onto your whiteboard. That way you're not stuck at your computer the entire time typing and doing things on the computer. You can actually walk up to the front of the room, mingle in among the students as you are allowed, especially if you're doing some social distancing types of things. But I think digital notebooks are probably here to stay, even post COVID-19. So you may be able to walk in around among your students. So up at the whiteboard and having it available to you on your computer maximizes the number of places that you can be while instructing your students. Keeps you moving around as well, keeps the students guessing so that you can monitor their behavior a little bit easier. So another thing that you may want to think about, if you have wireless devices like a wireless mouse or wireless keyboards or one of the notepads where you can actually walk around while writing on your computer screen, is those are great for digital notebooks because you can actually get up, get into different groups of students. You can be working on your computer while anywhere in the room. So if you don't have one of those, but it's an opportunity that becomes available through your school, to gain one of those, you can definitely justify your need for that by saying we're using a lot of digital interactive notebooks and this is why I want to be able to do that. So while you're actually explaining and demonstrating whatever the skill is in the notebook, because a lot of times we're using notebooks either while a concept is new or just after introducing a new concept to get those notes down so that students can continue to use those while they're doing their practice that's more independent. So it's often at a time when we're doing some new learning. Students don't already know what's going to go in the notebook because they haven't learned it yet. So while you're doing your actual demonstration and the students are watching that first time direct instruction, have them put their devices to the side. Either close them or just turn them away a little bit, move them off to the side of the desk. Let them take their notes either in like a scratch notebook, scratch paper, personal whiteboards, um, basically anywhere that's not digital unless they need to do digital as part of an IEP or something like that. Because When people are working and they're trying to take notes on a computer, they tend to get lost in the device a lot more easily than they're going to get lost in a piece of paper. So when it's that first time instruction, you want your students focused on you. You want your students focused on the practice. You want your students focused on the math or the science or the reading. You don't want them focused on the font. You don't want them focused on adjusting their text size. You don't want them focused on moving around a text box. You don't want any of that to be their focus. So have them do their initial note-taking old school, paper pencil, or slightly old school, dry erase marker, marker board. Then once you're done with sort of the I do, we do part, then have them bring their device back over. Use those notes that you have still up from when you were demonstrating and the notes that they took pencil paper while you were demonstrating, and actually have them fill out their interactive notebook and do those activities in the notebook based on those notes. Some of the examples that you did may be the exact ones that were in the notebook. And then you may have also done some examples that aren't in the, or that your example's not in the notebook, but the notebook has a different example. So they're actually having to apply what they just did, what they just took notes on, into something a little bit different, a little bit novel in their notebook, so you can see how they're beginning to transfer it. You're also going to want to chunk your notes. Not chunk them out the window, but you're going to want to chunk them into pieces, because number one, again, people get lost in digital a lot more easily than they get lost in pencil paper. So you don't want to turn them loose onto their computer, having to do pages of slides of interactive notebook. They're going to get lost in it. They're going to spend time on things that aren't what matters. So what I would suggest is maybe teaching the information that's on 1 or 2 slides, like 5 minutes of direct instruction, and then 5 minutes of them on the notebook. Or, but not much more than 5 minutes. It may even be shorter. 5 minutes of direct instruction, 3 minutes on the notebook. Whatever's reasonable for your students and their technology capabilities. Okay, so what if your students aren't in person? What if they're distance learning? This has been one of the biggest questions I've had, because usually when students are distance learning, the teacher is doing their direct teach through some type of live stream. So the students aren't able, most students only have one device. We're doing good to get each kid one device. There's no way we can ensure that each kid has 2 devices. And a lot of the devices aren't super large, so that's not real easy to do a split screen type of deal where they have the notebook open in one half and the live stream in the other half. It's just not feasible for them to be able to do both at once. Also, then we have bandwidth issues, internet issues. Keeping it simple is a really good thing for our distance learners. They have a lot going on in their physical space around them. A lot of times we don't need them to have a lot going on all at once on the screen. So share your screen with your students while you are either working live on your copy of the digital notebook, or that you're displaying a virtual whiteboard, or maybe you're even filming your actual scratch paper with your phone. A lot of creative things going on out there for how teachers are delivering virtual live stream lessons. So while you're live streaming, your students should not have their digital notebook open. Have them watch you. Have them focus on you. What they should have is a notebook, scratch paper, a whiteboard, something where they can write by hand, because they cannot spend their whole day typing and mouse maneuvering. They need some of that handwritten thing going on, especially if they're doing something like math where they are learning a new concept. They need that muscle memory of drawing the fractions or creating the long division problem or carrying the one. They need to actually do it rather than just manipulating things on the screen. So they are taking notes on an actual piece of paper or whiteboard while you are teaching. Once you're done with your chunk of teaching through your live stream, or if you have to, if it's a recording, tell them, watch the recording. While you're watching the recording, you've got your paper out. Don't try to do them both at once. Then direct them to open up the tab that has their notebook in it. Encourage them to leave their cameras on. Encourage them to leave their mics on while they move on to that other page. Although they can't see you anymore, you'll be able to see them and they'll be able to talk to you. That way, while they're filling out their notebook, if they start having questions and they need to say, oh, Mrs. So-and-so, I'm stuck here. What happens after I do this? Or I don't remember what you said about the American Revolution, or what's the difference between the butterfly life cycle and the beetle life cycle again? I don't remember. That way they can still have the interaction with you while they're filling out the notes. It also, little sneaky, it gives you the ability, you're watching them filling out the notes, and there's a difference between the expression on a child's face when they're filling out an interactive notebook than when they are watching TV off to the side, or when they are switched over to YouTube and watching a funny video. So you'll be able to do a little bit better monitoring that they're staying on task and keeping focused on their work. Give them a set amount of time, have a noise that goes off, or just say, okay, kids, it's time to come back. Then bring them back to do the next chunk of notes where, again, they've closed their tab for their notebook. They're back on their live stream tab for Zoom or whichever program you're using, so that they are, again, taking notes by hand, but that they're focused on watching you and not focused on adjusting the digital notebook. Again, the shorter bursts are definitely better, especially with distance learning, because they're often in an environment that's not ideal for staying focused, because they may have other things around them that are very interesting, like television or brothers and sisters and things like that, that can cause them to lose their focus. Now, maybe the hardest one are those of you who are teaching some kids in person and some kids distance learning at the same time. Luckily, since the strategies for the in-person and the distance learning are very similar, it's pretty easy. I won't say easy. I shouldn't say easy. It makes sense to merge these strategies together for a class that is a blended setting, where some of your kids are participating via a live stream and some of your kids are actually there in person. So again, you're going to display the interactive notebook using your projector, live stream what your screen to your distance learning students. Also, press that record button in case you need to have that recording available for them later. And then your in-person students are going to be watching what you're doing on the projector. The main difference at this time is you're not really going to be able to walk around necessarily right up on the actual whiteboard. You're going to need to act, unless you have a interactive whiteboard that links back to your computer screen digitally, you're going to need to do the work in a way that your live stream students are going to see it as well. So it would be best to actually do the work on your notebook, or to do the work on something that you can film. For example, if you're needing to do some handwritten math calculations to show them what to do that on like a virtual whiteboard, or on filming with your document camera what you actually are doing on a piece of paper. So again, you're going, while you're explaining, while you're demonstrating, have your in-class students put their devices to the side, have your virtual students just watching the live stream, and everyone is taking notes by hand, whether they're live or digital. Once your demonstration is finished, have the in-person students move on to their device and have your distance learning students open the window that has their notebook in it. Leave your work live so that your students who are there in person or there virtually can see your completed work, as well as the work that their notes that they were taking while you were demonstrating, so that they can fill out their notebook pages. Encourage your distance learning students to leave their camera and their microphone on while you walk around and checking on your in-person students. That way they can ask questions, and if you have the volume up, that way the whole group can hear them. That way they can participate as an actual class and not as two separate classes that just happen to be going on at the same time. After checking in on your in-person students, check in on your distance learning students before you move on to your next chunk of notes. Again, try to keep each chunk at a maximum of about 5 minutes of explaining or demonstrating. You don't want them to get lost, especially since you're having less opportunities to check on the students in between lessons. You want to keep it short so that they don't get lost and fall behind, and you don't get a chance to know that. If you have a program that allows you to remotely monitor your distance learner screens, use this to check in on them. That way you can see, are they keeping up at the pace of the lesson? Are they doing their actual notebooks? Are they doing the work? If you don't have a program like this, you may want to consider sort of randomly, the same way you would randomly select students in your in-person classroom to answer a question or to demonstrate something, to check and make sure everyone's still participating. You can randomly select a distance learner to share their screen and use their work as a part of a discussion for the whole group of students, for the whole class, both distance and in person. That way, you're keeping them really as a whole class together instead of as two separate groups of students. Another thing that's really important when you're using digital notebooks is how you're going to share your files. So when you share a Google Slides lesson, once it's gone out to your students, they each have their own copy of it. So if you realize, oh, I need to add another page to it, or I want to add the whole next unit to it, you can't do that really. There are some programs that will allow you to sort of go back and move slides in and take slides out if you need to, but most of those are paid programs and they don't always work how you expect them to. So it's better that once you've released the notebook to the students, that you don't need it back from the students. You don't need to access it again. So you want to release the files in either unit or lesson size chunks. So for example, I always think of math and science because that's what I teach. I'm doing my lesson on place value. I might release just the part about comparing and ordering decimals. I'm not necessarily going to release comparing and ordering decimals and rounding and expanded notation out to them all at once. I may just do a piece at a time. That way, if there is something that I need to fix, I'm doing it in a smaller chunk. That way, once it goes out to them, I don't need it back, and I'm not going to have to say something like, okay, everybody, I need you to go to slide 2, and we're all going to have to fix this real quick. Or that you don't have to go into every single child's copy of a notebook and fix something or add something to it that you meant to give them before. If they're used to getting it in small chunks, then you can just, if something is wrong, you can just release it out to them in the next chunk of notebook that you're giving them. Also, you don't want your files to be so many slides that it becomes inefficient for the computer to run the program. So if the notebook gets too big, especially because a lot of digital notebooks are going to be using images and shapes and text boxes and all sorts of the things that make them really fun, those files can get big pretty fast. And especially if you are on an internet connection that may be having some bandwidth issues and things like that, which is more common right now. You want to keep those files a manageable size. That way that they're not freezing up and things like that when your students are trying to use them. I'd also recommend one of your very first lessons at the beginning of using an interactive notebook with your students digitally is to teach them how to make a folder in their Google Drive, or if you're a Microsoft district, in your OneDrive. That way your students have a place to keep all their notebooks. So if they have digital notebooks for multiple subjects, I'd also encourage, make one folder math digital notebook, science digital notebook, ELA digital notebook, social studies digital notebook. That way when they get one, they can put it into that folder, and then they'll have all their notebooks for the year in that folder. And so they can go back in and say, oh, I don't remember this thing about place value. We did that way back at the beginning of the year. They can go into their math notebook folder and they can find that file to go get a refresher about what they did back at the beginning of the school year. Also, when teaching with a digital notebook, it's important to remember that hands-on is still so needed for our students, especially in these times when a lot of things have gone digital. They're going to need some time to just do things the old-fashioned way, to do things pencil paper, to do things outside of their screen. So a digital notebook is actually great because it doesn't have to be digital all the time. So if they are doing something on paper, or if you're able to have them print worksheets or activities, or if maybe you deliver activity packets where they actually have some paper work, they can just snap a picture using their phone of their work, or they can use their webcam and snap a picture. And it's important to teach them how to insert that file into their notebook. That way they have a way to show and to keep a record of what they're doing by hand in their digital notebook. Same thing for in-class learning. You don't want to do everything digital all the time. You may have days when maybe you can't use your computers or the internet's down, and that doesn't mean you can't notebook. You're just going to notebook on paper, and then your students will snap a picture and then they can upload that into their digital notebook at a later time. So another thing besides just the screen fatigue and needing a break from using your computer sometimes is some things are just so much easier to do by hand. For example, if you're needing your students to sketch a picture to represent a vocabulary word, making pictures on the screen can be very difficult. If your student's having to draw with a mouse or write with a mouse, even if they do have a stylus, a lot of the styluses, unless they're the really expensive type, like an iPencil or one of those professional grade styluses, don't really draw that easily either. So let them sketch it on paper. Let them use their colored pencils and their markers and their fun art supplies. Let them do the work by hand and then snap a picture of it. Also, a lot of math problems are much easier to write than they are to type, especially if you're working on fractions. You can type fractions. It is possible to type fractions, but it's so much easier, so much faster, and so much more effective just to write the fractions by hand. And then that way they can, again, just snap a picture of their work and insert that into their notebook. And then besides being easy, some work is way more fun to do by hand. So if you're a science teacher, yeah, there's tons of cool virtual experiments out there, but some simple experiments can even be done at home. If they're doing the baking soda and vinegar, maybe they're actually going to do that at their house. Don't just watch someone else do it on the computer. Let them grab their cameras and film their experiment, their demonstration, and then they can actually input that video into their digital notebook so that they can go back and watch it again and again instead of just that one time. Great way at home, at school, to keep that experiment fresh in their mind. In math class, we use a lot of demonstrations and experiments for math that involve paper folding or manipulatives. That just isn't as much fun, even using the best virtual manipulative site or the best digital version or watching a YouTube video. It's just not as much fun as actually getting to fold the paper and see what happens and see the results in person. So again, have them do that for real and either film it or take a picture of what they've got going on. That way they can just put that in their notebook once they're finished. And then for like social studies or reading, let them do some acting or reading aloud of their passages, of their social studies. Maybe you have readers theater, something like that, where they can record either just their voice or they can record a video of them acting it out. And again, that's so much more hands-on and real life than just watching someone else do it or just typing about it. So let them do those fun hands-on activities and then save them all in one spot so that they can go back to them and look at them again by uploading those videos or that audio or those pictures into their digital interactive notebook. Thanks for joining me on the journey of digital interactive notebooks. I hope that was informative for you. You can find me on leafandstemlearning.com. I hope to see you there. Bye.